Could the investigation into the mass brawl after AEW All Out just a couple of months ago be about to wrap up, leading to a decision on the future of former AEW World Champion CM Punk, Kenny Omega, and the Young Bucks? We've got the latest details on that. Plus, Sammy Guevara has been in the eye of the storm recently with several backstage altercations, and what's his reputation backstage in AEW right now? We've got an update on that. The Varsity Blondes are no more. There's a new name for the tag team involving Griff Garrison and Brian Pillman Jr. Jon Moxley in GCW. Will he ever be back now he's signed this contract extension with AEW? And AEW is listed in a very important list. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling, so we've got to start off talking still, even a couple of months removed, about former AEW World Champion CM Punk, the mass brawl after All Out, the infamous brawl out, what they're calling, obviously the famous, now infamous, press conference post-show media scrum from CM Punk, the suspensions of Kenny Omega, the suspensions of the Young Bucks. We've got an update on this external investigation and what possibly it could mean for the future of the likes of Punk, Omega, and the Bucks. So let's get straight into it. Now, following the recent news that AEW is, quote, not looking to bring back CM Punk, and the locker room reportedly expressing anti-Punk sentiments, an update has emerged on the status of the investigation into the alleged altercation following AEW's all-out infamous media scrum and infamous comments by Punk, bashing the AEW roster, bashing the EVPs, bashing Hangman Page, bashing Colt Cabana. And as per Dave Meltzer on the Wrestling Observer radio show, and as I always mention, as I've spoken about a million times when I've spoken about this topic, a million times when we've spoken about Dave Meltzer's perspective on things, it's just one perspective, but when Meltzer talks about AEW and Meltzer talks about All Elite Wrestling, chances are he's spoken to people directly involved, i.e. Tony Khan, i.e. Kenny Omega, i.e. the Young Bucks. That was one of Phil Brooks's biggest frustrations, was people like Dave Meltzer getting his information, allegedly, from people like the Young Bucks. So if Meltzer's saying this is the case, chances are he's probably spoken to the AEW president on the matter. And Meltzer has said on the latest episode of the Wrestling Observer radio show, the investigation into the backstage fracas is believed to be wrapping up. Meltzer explained, quote, it's so unlike most organizations in the sense that when you've got the big star, CM Punk, and I know a lot of the locker room is very negative to him, but when you've got your big drawing card and something like that happens, you try and salvage it, save it. I know a lot of people are disappointed. I'm not saying that the decision is wrong, considering how much time they put into the decision. And you know that, again, you're not going to get rid of your big drawing card unless there is a way over the bounds. Now, Meltzer drew on a hypothetical example based on other reports of recent backstage heat between Andrade, our Idolo, and Sammy Guevara, who we are going to touch on in just a second. But Meltzer explained why he thinks CM Punk's actions were not worked into an on-screen angle, explaining, quote, because you're always going to get a second chance. And he did after the Adam Page promo where he did that impromptu deal. Let's say Sammy Guevara, for example. Sammy Guevara has a problem with Andrade, but he's not feuding with him or anything. Just out of nowhere, while Andrade is backstage, Sammy just cuts that impromptu promo like Punk did to Page. Sammy gets fired from that. No question about it. Punk didn't, because he's Punk, and that probably bought him some extra. But then the other two things happened. So many people have brought up to me the idea of turning this into an angle, which certainly UFC would have turned this into an angle if the guys were in the same weight class and promoted the hell out of it and been happy to do so. And WWE would have probably as well. But maybe in this situation, they being AEW, felt that they just needed to, quote, not turn this into an angle, and I know that a lot of talent felt that. This thing feels like it's wrapping up. It feels like the Young Bucks and Omega are coming back somewhat soon. That's not official or anything like that. That's just a feeling. There's been teasers and stuff, end quote. Following Meltzer's previous report that AEW is attempting to buy CM Punk out of the remaining years of his contract, this is the latest to suggest that the company is trying to wash its hands of the former two-time AEW World Champion. Meltzer explained that buyout negotiations were currently held up over a non-compete clause, suggesting that AEW are trying to quash a potential signing with competitors WWE. CM Punk, though, is out of action for several months due to the tricep injury he sustained during his last match in an AEW ring against Jon Moxley in the main event of All Out. So if he were to make a comeback to WWE under Triple H, it's unlikely we would see him perform for some time or wrestle until way into 2023. Fans will have to stay tuned to see if Meltzer's hunch about a return for the Young Bucks and Omega will be coming soon. This news follows the report of Ace Steel's firing from AEW due to his involvement in the backstage fallout from Brawlout. So that's the latest update. Meltzer's saying that he feels that this thing is wrapping up and coming to a conclusion. Frankly, it should. I mean, this happened, at the beginning of September. We're now nearly into November, so we're looking at an incident that's being investigated for 2 months. And I feel that, and I said this last week, once you start getting into these teases of naming the Elite on television, once you start getting into the realm of even showing CM Punk's face on AEW television, which they did last week in that Ring of Honor World Championship package on Dynamite, clearly, from a legal perspective, AEW feels quite comfortable with what they're doing at the moment, and they feel like they're in the safe zone when it comes to legality, and they feel like certainly that they're making significant progress on Punk's end in terms of his departure, his exit from the company, that the litigation that maybe he may, allegedly, we don't know, but the litigation that maybe he had been threatening previously is now somewhat off the table, because AEW, it would feel like, has finally come to the conclusion that we need to pay this guy what he's owed. We don't want him in the company anymore, and let's negotiate the way out. The holdup isn't on money, according to reports. The holdup on Punk's departure from AEW isn't based on money. It's based, maybe on future money that Punk could make with WWE, but it certainly isn't based on what money AEW is willing to give him or what he's owed. What is, again, the difficult part of this is that we don't know the finer details of CM Punk's contract, nor really should we, but we don't know the finer details of it, so we don't know what CM Punk's base salary is in AEW. It's the highest in All Elite Wrestling. That's not a stretch to suggest. We don't know if he had a no-cut contract, which very few wrestlers have. A couple of them in WWE have them, the likes of Brock Lesnar, etc. The Roman Reigns have a no-cut contract, i.e. you cannot fire me for budget cuts or anything like that. Gross misconduct might be something else, but you can't fire me. You can't let me go. I would suggest CM Punk, there's a chance CM Punk may have that. And if that is the case, again, that gives Punk more advantage when it comes to a legal point of view of you can't fire me, but I am willing to negotiate a buyout of my contract. I want what I'm owed, my guaranteed base salary, and maybe some residuals or some compromise on what I would probably be able to earn from a merchandise point of view, because again, CM Punk is the number one merch seller in AEW, or at least he was prior to all of this. Now you've got the likes of The Acclaimed being number one t-shirt mover for the year, but CM Punk was always right at the top of that list. So again, from his perspective, he'd be thinking, well, am I going to get as much merch money? Am I going to be getting bonuses from pay-per-views? Well, of course I'm not. I'm not wrestling, and I'm not going to be with the company. So that's what the negotiations are based on, and also, as I mentioned, the buyout clause. But it would appear that CM Punk and AEW are fairly aligned on the money side. It's just this buyout situation. It's just the non-compete clause, rather. That's the situation from it. So I would agree with Meltzer's sentiments that this appears to be wrapping up. It would also appear, again, as part of these negotiations, it would appear certainly, wouldn't it, that maybe, just maybe, as part of the discussions about a buyout of his contract, CM Punk could stand his ground and threaten legal action, but at the same time, AEW could say, we've done this investigation and we feel we have sufficient evidence and sufficient eyewitness testimony that if this were to go down the legal route, if this were to go to court, if you did want to bring this to an employment tribunal, whatever it may be, we feel like we're pretty good. We're pretty safe in this situation. So let's figure this out, and let's work out a departure that suits all parties. And that feels like the direction that we're going in. Previously, I had stated, I'm not going to run away from it as well, that I didn't think the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega would wrestle inside of an AEW ring again this year. Next year, I thought that'd be a possibility. It's difficult to say whether that I'm still on of that mindset, because at the same time you would say, well, Owen, it's not even November yet. There's still plenty of time. But at the same time, this thing has dragged on a while, and the longer we get on into the year, maybe it is a case of if it gets to the point where it's mid to late November or the beginning of December, maybe they do save the Young Bucks return until January to start off next year afresh. I don't know. I mean, it depends on the proximity to Full Gear as well. If it's close enough to Full Gear, maybe they return at that pay-per-view. That would make sense. Or if it's after Full Gear, as I mentioned, maybe they wait for Winter is Coming, because that'll be an event in December. So there are certainly events they could show up in, but it all depends on how can AEW manage the CM Punk exit strategy. It's not confirmed yet, but it appears to be closer than it has been in a long time. CM Punk also broke his social media silence today, posted an Instagram story about a movie that's on Netflix that was written by his wife, AJ Lee, and Amy Garcia of Dexter fame. So it would appear that CM Punk is slowly emerging once again. I would assume as part of a negotiation of a buyout, CM Punk will not talk about this incident because, one, he won't be able to from NDAs and legal ramifications as well. So as I've said before, I don't think we're really ever going to truly find out what actually happened that night from those involved. Maybe some way down the line, but I'm not sure if we will. Now, speaking of backstage altercations, Sammy Guevara has been the subject of a couple recently, hasn't he? Eddie Kingston, Andrade Al Idolo, and Guevara has been somewhat of a polarizing figure since stepping into the spotlight in All Elite Wrestling, whether it's his televised engagement eventually falling apart, his quick marriage to Tay Mello soon after, his issues with Eddie Kingston, or his recent backstage confrontation with Andrade Al Idolo. Guevara has been in the headlines more often than not. Fans who frown at his behavior aren't the ones only feeling this type of way about the three-time TNT champion, though. According to PW Talk's Wade Keller, people, quote, in AEW like Sammy, but they groan at Sammy's decision-making, Keller adds. I don't know how the Sammy situation will be addressed going forward, but it's sort of like two strikes. He continued that he's going to have to grow up and mature a little bit, and I think there's going to be some leadership steering in him in that direction now. Which again is quite interesting because I find that line fascinating, actually. Some people in AEW like Sammy, but they groan at his decision making. And you know what? I think that's a fair assumption of a lot of people on social media. I don't think many people dislike Sammy Guevara, the wrestler, or Sammy Guevara's his ability to work a match or his ability to have great matches. When Sammy Guevara is in the ring and he's wrestling, he tends to have excellent matches. You can argue if he's a bit of a spot monkey or, does he know the real basic fundamentals of wrestling psychology? Maybe not, but that's today's modern style. I think the biggest point of frustration or contention with these people that don't like Guevara is his decision-making, is his behavior, is his arrogance or his perceived arrogance, is his behavior on social media, or is his behavior in interviews. I think that's the biggest point of frustration, and we've heard so much recently about this new leadership structure that stepped up in the absence of Omega and the Bucks, namely Bryan Danielson, Jon Moxley, and Chris Jericho. Logically, you would think Sammy Guevara being under the wing of Chris Jericho, not just on screen but off of it for 3 years now, Guevara would have matured and Guevara would have grown up, but it feels like during that time he's only gotten worse. And I don't know if that's because of exposure. I don't know if that's because of too much too soon. I mean, Guevara came in and he's had a radical transformation in AEW. He was in the first ever match on Dynamite history against Cody Rhodes. He came out wearing a panda head. Now he's with the Jericho Appreciation Society and he's a 3-time TNT champion. And is he considered one of the pillars? I forget how many pillars there are of AEW sometimes, but he's considered a major player in AEW. Maybe it is a lot too much too soon and some people can't handle it and some people can't handle the scrutiny sometimes of the spotlight on them. But I think that sentiment is probably shared by a lot of fans. I mean, there is going to be some fans that just never like you. That's life, unfortunately, and you have to understand that. And there are going to be people that have assumptions about you and make their minds up on certain things about you that they have no idea or no details on. But I think the biggest point of frustration for myself, and I'm a Sammy Guevara fan, I'm not too hot on his personality outside of the ring, it must be said. But again, that's for the same reason as quite a few people, where it's just sometimes his behavior or sometimes his, so maybe like his aura, it just sometimes can be a bit jarring or can rub you the wrong way. And then sometimes the worst thing to do with that is to tap into that and rub it in people's faces or just, really shove it in their faces even more. And perhaps that's what's happening with Guevara in AEW. Got an update on Brian Pillman Jr. and Griff Garrison and a name change for the tag team. A name change has been confirmed for the AEW tag team of Brian Pillman Jr. and Griff Garrison, formerly known as the Varsity Blondes. Pillman and Garrison began working as a tag team in July of 2020, adopting the name in early December of that year. Of course, it plays on the Hollywood Blondes, Brian Pillman and Stone Cold Steve Austin, or Steve Austin, stunning Steve Austin in WCW back in the day. It's a play on that. But according to a tweet from the official AEW Twitter account, Pillman and Garrison will now be known simply as the Blondes moving forward. The tweet advertised yesterday's evening edition of Dark Elevation and used the new moniker to refer to the duo, saying, quote, check out tonight's brand new episode of Dark Elevation featuring Dark Order's Preston 10 Vance, Serena Deeb, the Workhorsemen versus the Blondes, and much more. The most recent televised match took place on the October 7 edition of AEW Rampage in a losing effort to Josh Woods and Tony Nese, who then became known as the Varsity Athletes, hence why Pillman and Garrison are no longer the Varsity Blondes. The two have also taped a match for an upcoming episode of AEW Dark against the Factory's Cole Carter and QT Marshall. So they've got a different name. It must be said, I was never really super hot on the gimmick anyway, when they were with Julia Hart as well, and it felt like a gimmick that you would see on an episode of WCW, not even Nitro, sort of Saturday, whatever, in the mid to mid 90s, early 90s. It just felt like that, What I will say is, if you go back and watch, and I saw a clip on social media, if you go back and watch, Brian Pillman Jr. does a hot tag in his match last night on Dark Elevation. It was excellent. It's a heck of a hot tag. Now, it must be said, you had to I did a bit of a double take because I thought it was Kenny Omega. It's very, very Kenny Omega-ish, to the point he's doing knees. Even when he does a dive, he does a dive over the top rope. His stride is similar to Kenny Omega, and the dive over is very similar. People forget with Brian Pillman Jr. as well is he got into the business, I want to say like 2015, 2016. It might even be later than that. He's not super experienced. But obviously, look, second generation wrestler. He's got the name. I don't know if he's ever going to live up to the standards of his father, because they're pretty high standards to live up to and pretty big boots to fill. And Brian Pillman was a one-off. The Loose Cannon was a one-off. He's one of my favorite promos of all time. And the character, it's just such a shame what happened to him, because that character was so ahead of its time. And Brian Pillman Jr. just isn't like that. He's not similar to his father in that way. And frankly, I think the best thing for him is to single out his own legacy, and he will do that in time. But the Varsity Blondes thing was never really a thing for me. But I'm not sure the Blondes is a much better tag team name. Maybe they need to come up with something else. Let's talk about Jon Moxley and GCW. There's been a lot of talk about the former GCW World Champion no longer appearing for the promotion, and GCW owner Brett Lauderdale has discussed whether AEW World Champion Jon Moxley could return in controversial fashion to the promotion following his new AEW contract extension. Of course, Moxley lost the GCW World Championship to Nick Gage at GCW's Fight Club event. The loss came one day after it was announced that Moxley had signed a contract extension with AEW, tying Moxley to AEW and its international partners exclusively. Lauderdale has now opened up about the situation on the Business of the Business podcast and discussed whether or not he expects Moxley to return to GCW following the title loss. He said, quote, I've had very little interaction with AEW itself over the years. Booking Moxley, I never spoke to AEW. It was always just Mox, talking to him and him handling, I guess, whatever needed to be handled with AEW. But I'm sure things are going to change now. I don't think we'll see him as frequently, but I do think we'll see him again. I think if there comes a time where there's somebody he wants to wrestle or show he wants to be a part of, I think he'll be there. I think he'll let me know in much the same way as he's let me know over the past, whatever it was, 399 days. He'll shoot me a text and say, what do you got coming up this month? Or when are you going to be in this place? That's how it would often come together. So I wouldn't be surprised if I hear from him again in a few months or 6 months or whatever, sometime in the next year. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes back again and stops in for another event. But again, he does have priorities, and I don't expect it. I don't know what the word is. I wouldn't be surprised. I'll continue to look at it as a bonus by any time he comes around. Now, when it comes to this relationship, or lack thereof, a lack of a relationship between AEW and GCW. Lauderdale said, quotes, "I don't know, I'll be honest. The real honest answer is I don't know what our relationship is with AEW, and I don't mean that in a bad way or a good way. Again, I have very little direct interaction with AEW, so I don't know. In terms of there being AEW people being banned or barred from wrestling for GCW, I'm not sure that such an edict exists. I would think that if that was a rule, I think I would know. But then again, they don't send me a weekly email or an update, so I'm not sure. Everything's just on a case-by-case basis. So I don't know if I expect Moxley to be back in GCW. I expect Moxley to be working indie dates, as we said. They're not going to be advertised ahead of time. They're going to be surprise appearances. It was something Tony Khan pushed for. So Moxley wanted to continue to work the indies, but at the same time, I think Tony Khan said to him, look, I'm building the company around you. You're going to be my world champion. I need exclusivity. Or I still will let you do New Japan because I know that's what you want to do, and they're an international partner. And if we can sort out an indie date on a case-by-case basis, but I need to protect my interest, my asset there. And I think that's fair. I do. So I'm not sure if we'll see Moxley again in GCW, but I think we'll see him on the independent scene, certainly. Finally, AEW are crowing after being named on a list that is known as Brands That Matter. Now, All Elite Wrestling has received an unexpected accolade, being named on Fast Company's second annual Brands That Matter list. Now, Fast Company is a monthly American business magazine that covers a variety of subjects such as business, technology, and design. AEW announced the recognition via a tweet which said, "Have you heard? AEW has been named one of Fast Company's Brands That Matter for 2022. Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful also shared a press release from AEW to his Twitter, which noted that AEW was one of 145 companies to be recognized on the 2022 list. The release noted that all the 145 companies on the list have found an ability to forge an emotional connection with customers, whether leading on the environment of pop culture, engaging in B2B customers, or responding meaningfully to current events." So there you go. What that list means, I have no idea. Whether that's a good thing, I have no idea. It's certainly good PR for AEW, so they're crowing about it. It certainly is important to matter, is it not? So there you go, guys. That's the latest AEW news for you. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe bottom right-hand corner. Let me know your thoughts on today's AEW news stories in the comment section below, and I'll speak for you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.